And he's talking about how, like, underneath a lot of these power lines, there's no mowing being done. There's no cutting down of trees. There's no maintenance whatsoever being done. They're not spending money on that stuff. Yeah. They don't have the money.
Any money to spend.
Free Talk Live.
Free Market Penguin from Virginia. Penguin, you're on Free Talk Live.
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to call in, and I hate to bring up this topic again, but I'm going to bring up Venezuela. And Ian, another listener and I were talking in the Discord, and we were kind of taken aback how we both listened to the podcast and how it was dismissed offhand that it's unlikely that the U.S. has a role in the nationwide Venezuelan blackouts.
Yeah, I'm just saying, based on Occam's razor, it's more likely to be bureaucratic incompetence and failure of central planning than it is to be an attack from the outside.
But it does illustrate why we shouldn't be meddling in other countries at all, because we give them excuses for their failure.
No, I agree that the government, we're not meddling, but you mean the federal government.
Yes, federal government. I didn't do any of this stuff. I've never even been to Venezuela.
I agree with you that they shouldn't be meddling, but just because the federal government has placed they put sanctions on Venezuela.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily mean that they're hacking their power system. There's not really any evidence that they have. And further, again, Occam's razor, the principle in explaining a thing, no more assumptions should be made than are necessary. I mean, it seems generally the idea is what is the most likely explanation is the most likely explanation, as I understand it, and in which case centralized management of property tends to fail. And so it's not unbelievable that the government in Venezuela has screwed this up. In fact, there was an Ask Me Anything on Reddit with a guy claiming to, I think his name was Alfonso, claiming to be in Venezuela, Ask Me Anything, basically. And he linked over to a guy who's on his Twitter, and I don't have it with me right now, but on his Twitter he assessed a lot of the situation with the power as like a professional, somebody who kind of is in that a bit, has the ability to professionally assess that. And he's talking about how, like, underneath a lot of these power lines, there's no mowing being done, there's no cutting down of trees, there's no maintenance whatsoever being done. They're not spending money on that stuff.
Yeah.
They don't have
any money to spend.
So
they've got plenty of money. It just won't buy any food.
Well, right. And so
I agree, and it obviously makes sense. No, I agree. There's no evidence, but I'd like to point out,
and there's evidence to the contrary, like lack of upkeep on the part of the government-run power company in Venezuela. There's evidence that they are doing a piss-poor job with upkeep.
I do want to point out, though, that this is the frontier of modern war, not modern, but in the future of warfare. That the United States invests billions in offensive and defensive capabilities to harden the grid and attack others. And I'd like to point out that the government that occupies Palestine and the U.S. intelligence services have successfully and very openly, very well publicized event where they the Stuxnet virus, where they actually used a mole. I think the Iranian centrifuge was actually air-gapped from the internet. It should have been.
Yeah.
And they introduced a virus, and it had the centrifuge go out of control and destroyed the centrifuge and a lot of Iran's capability to make nuclear fissile material.
Yeah.
By
I don't think
that method.
I'm with you, Penguin, that I don't think that the U.S. certainly does not have a record of not doing things like this. And Stuxnet was a real good example of them aggressively going after a foreign power that they didn't agree with, and they did it in a way that damaged not only Iran, but companies around the world, because Stuxnet, the genie got out of the bottle. And Stuxnet ended up being the basis for all kinds of viruses that we're still trying to deal with today. I don't think it's outside the realms. I tend to agree with these guys that in this case, I mean, you've got plenty of incompetence to point at and poor management, which is what you get out of central planning. You know what I mean?
I certainly agree, and I certainly am opposed to central planning. That is pretty much one of the big buzzwords that I use. But I do want to point out that the Stuxnet and the fact that these are the capabilities that militaries worldwide are developing, and this is kind of the new frontier of warfare. So it's certainly certainly be good to keep that possibility in mind.
And maybe, maybe the federal government tipped over a domino, kind of effect where all the failed upkeep resulted in an even worse outage than would otherwise have been through just a normal failure. But I still think it's likely that it was all the failure of the central planners, because again, this was the claim of the North Korean government for the longest time, for a couple of decades, as I understand it, when the power was relatively unreliable throughout North Korea, where the places where they did have power at all, it was unreliable. It'd be going off in the middle of the night for various different, times, multiple times per week, as I understand it. And the official state excuse was, well, we're under attack from the U.S. government. The U.S. government is taking down our power grid constantly. We just can't do anything about it. We're just under attack by the... It's just, come on. That's unbelievable that would really be the truth.
Level of crying wolf.
Honestly,
there.
That's normal in most of the world.
It's the claim.
You have power some of the time.
Yeah.
But the point that he brings...
I mean, I can see reasons that they might do that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
But you don't have to. They're that incompetent. These are the communists we're talking about here.
Right, but of course, they're not going to admit to their own incompetence.
Right, but you're also dealing with U.S. imperialism that has something like 100-year-old history of mucking about in other people's countries. That's the part.
And
hey,
that's why
Penguin, thanks
arms
for the
neutrality is so important to me.
Is it? We'll have to talk about net neutrality, or at least whatever
arms
net neutrality.
I'm talking about a foreign policy of neutrality.
Yeah, it's a
good
neutrality. Policy. We'll see you tomorrow night. freetalklive.com.
Free Talk Live. Listen live 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern, or grab the podcast. It's all at freetalklive.com.